When you need to focus on building, do you want to get bogged down by your database? MongoDB is an intuitive, flexible document database that lets you get to building. MongoDB's document model is a natural way to represent data so you can focus on what matters. MongoDB Atlas is the best way to use MongoDB. It's a global cloud database service that gives you all of the developer productivity of MongoDB, plus the added simplicity of a fully managed database service. You can get started free with MongoDB Atlas at mongodb.com/atlas. Hi, this is Scott Hansel, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm talking with Keavy McMinn. She's a software engineer. She's worked on product and technical challenges for a number of years, and she's led significant engineering projects at GitHub, including GitHub Apps. How are you?
I'm good, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I found your blog at keavy.com, Keavy, and you've got a number of really great blog posts. They all kind of have a theme. You talk about building bridges as a technical leader, and one of my favorites is called Thriving on the Technical Leadership Path. Since we're not really early in career people, I don't think it's appropriate anymore to say junior or senior. There's early in career, there's maybe later in career or more senior. I assumed that you were maybe a CTO or you were the chief engineer, but you don't have an org that works for you, right? You don't have a team of 10 engineers, do you?
Oh, wow. No, I wish. I'm just an IC. I don't have a team. I work with a bunch of teams.
When you're 20 years into a career, they keep trying to poke you and say, well, hey, here's a team here. And suddenly the next thing you know, you're a manager, and you just and then you always hear the person that says, well, I used to be technical. How did you keep that from happening?
Oh, yeah. I had a short stint as being an engineer manager a few years ago, and I was sort of reluctantly tried it out. And I was already a tech lead for a project that I really cared a lot about. And I think it was partly, if you don't become a manager, it sort of would threaten the people on that team or threaten the project. So I kind of semi-reluctantly did it to save the project, and then realized I just did not like being a manager. You know, I don't really want to know about people's salaries and have that kind of responsibility. So in the end, I said, I actually really don't want to do this anymore. And luckily, the company was okay with, I guess, realizing that I could just carry on as I had been before I was called a manager. And I was still effectively running a team and running a project. So a lot of things didn't change, but I was definitely happier.
Was that hard, though? I mean, like when I was given a team, I felt like, oh, gosh, are they going to think I don't like people if I say I don't want to be a manager? Is it going to affect my career? I wonder how many people go into management because they love it versus they just have been around so long, now you should be a manager.
Oh, definitely. I think there's huge pressure to, once you've been an IC for a certain amount of years, I think there's huge pressure to be a manager. It's sort of the only maybe obvious career progression choice for a lot of folk, which is a real shame.
Why is that? What does that mean? That no one's ever dug into that. It's like you show up to a company for 5 years or 10 years, someone looks at you and says, oh, it's you're still here. Hey, Keavy should be a manager. But why? Just because you're here still?
I know. And I think some companies go, the pendulum swings a little bit. My stint as a manager was at GitHub, and once upon a time at GitHub, there were famously no managers at all. And
how did that work out?
I mean, it was actually kind of great for a while. I mean, there were definite downsides, but a lot of things shipped, and people were very self-driven, self-motivated, because I guess you had to be. So I don't know, some companies I think then have swung really far in the other direction of manager is the be-all and end-all of everything, and that's increased the pressure to this is the direction your career should go. And certainly there's a lot of promotion, there's a lot of promotion possibilities for people in that path, and much less so on the IC path. So.
In your blog post, you call that out. You were a manager for 73 days. You counted, it sounds like.
Yep.
But you decided it wasn't for you, and fortunately, the company didn't judge you or give you a hard time for saying, "I don't want to be a manager." And you decided that there should be a path for technical leaders who are individual contributors. But does that mean that the person who is trying to go along this path, is like the smartest? Right? You're not necessarily you're senior, you're later in career, but you're not saying that you're the most technical person on the team. You're just someone who's got experience.
Definitely not. Like, I am probably never the smartest person in the room, so to speak. I think what it is more about and what I'm better at is just moving things forward and getting the right people together in the room and figuring out what's missing and how can we solve those problems and just continually moving things forward more than, yeah, I think it's more about persistence and maybe stubbornness than pure technical knowledge. And obviously, like you have to have a certain amount of the technical skills to back that up. But yeah, it's more broad.
I really appreciate that word persistence, and I think about the kind of some of the younger and earlier in career people that I mentor, and it's hard to teach them that. But honestly, just you can't solve every problem in 45 minutes of Googling.
Yeah,
Sometimes you just need to sit down and do it.
totally. And like when I think about as well, like the projects that I've seen over the years fail, like it's never been because those engineers weren't smart enough. Quite the contrary, maybe sometimes. But when people are too honed in on a technical solution, the chances of that, especially in a bigger organization or, the chances of the technical knowledge being enough to see something through to be a successful ship is just so slim, I think, that, yeah, it really does take persistence and figuring out all the other parts of the jigsaw puzzle to get something successfully shipped.
Yeah, I think that we sometimes mythologize the more elder engineer, and we just assume that, like, well, they've been here 20 years, they must know everything. One day I'll be that smart. But it's really that they're good at coordinating, they're good at communicating, and they also sometimes know what other orgs are working on, so that you might propose a technical solution and you go, well, actually, strategically in a year, that's not the direction we want to go. But a line engineer wouldn't know that.
Absolutely, yeah. And like being in touch with like what does the business really need and what's it still going to need in a year's time or 2 years' time, or keeping in touch with that is probably pretty critically important. And then a thing that I found has really worked for me is also knowing what I'm not good at and finding the people to work with that balance my skill set. Like one big project I worked on at GitHub, like specifically, like I formed a team to work on this big project and recruited people that would balance my skill set. So like I guess there are things that also don't stress me out, like time deadlines and doing all the coordination between different groups. But there are other engineers that hate that side of things, but maybe are like super good at getting into the nitty gritty of the code or refactoring something. And so teaming those kind of skills together has really worked well for me.
It seems like, though, at a certain age, as you move through the kind of the bell curve of your career, it's hard to say that you don't know something and that you want to balance it out. Like, that's a very mature thing to say. I think a lot of early in career people think that they will eventually become a Swiss Army knife and know everything. But acknowledging, like, I'm just not I don't know, low-level
Yeah.
hex dump debugger type, and that's just not my thing, and I'm not going to apologize for it not being my thing.
Yeah. I guess I've definitely noticed as I've got older or more experienced that I am more comfortable saying that. And maybe it's a mixture of like being comfortable in what you do know, but I've become very comfortable of saying in a group like, oh, I like, what does that word mean that you're saying? Like, what's that acronym? Or like,
I do it now because sometimes I'm suspicious in meetings where they'll say an acronym and I'm thinking that maybe they did it just to make us all feel dumb. And I'll just stare them down. Like, I don't know what that acronym is. What does that mean? But
right.
also all the young people, all the early career people don't know. So then I'm like, I'm not going to let them all just sit there hanging and go
Oh,
later and Google what that is. Oh, tell me what that acronym is.
right, totally. And I think like it's a really good example to set for earlier career folk. Funny, in my current job at Fastly, I'm in this little group, the office of the CTO, where there's a lot of like properly smart engineers that work on stuff that is kind of like completely different to my work, that are working like on the packets, or
Hmm.
something really lower level that I'm used to. But what's been fascinating working with those folk is that they're not patronizing, or like they'll be just as fascinated. And in what I'm working on with maybe the APIs that, I don't know, just completely different ends of the spectrum. And I think the more mature engineers get that, like the lower ego, and people are comfortable saying they don't know, and enjoying just, learning from people that do have a specialism in a particular area.
Well, when you have a good design and the APIs are clear and you have a series of layers, right? And you say, that's a lovely design that this layer calls that layer and each layer knows what it's good at doing. We always talk about single responsibility principle, but we don't usually think about that in the context of people because everyone's expected to know everything. But it is nice to have a team where it's like, all right, I know the packets on the, I'll talk TCP/IP and I'm cool with that. And here's the interface that I'll be interfacing with you on. And when it's nice and clear and crisp, it does work out very nicely. The organization's layering is as nice as the software layering.
Yeah, definitely. One of the best compliments I've had from a colleague, Katrina, said to me once that I was her favorite person to disagree with, which I thought was awesome. And we had a really good working relationship. And when we disagreed with each other, it was always from a place of like, ooh, what do you know that I don't? Like, what are
Mm.
your experiences that have formed that opinion? And usually there was, a very good thing that one of us was just missing. Yeah, that was pretty cool.
That's a really important thing to point out also is that we always talk about the myth of the 10x engineer and the super smart person that is, in a closet somewhere and we just push pizza under the door and, they know all the answers. But we are this just big Venn diagram of people with different experiences. And on this problem, you might know the thing. And on the other one, your intuition might know the thing. Sharing that knowledge freely without judgment, without any concern makes you want to go to work in the morning as opposed to the like, oh, they're going to know I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have any value.
Yeah, absolutely.
You use the term in your blog strategic technical leader, and you also have this great phrase where you said you love being parachuted into a situation. When I think about the parachuting person, I think about two kinds. There's either the general that comes in. Another example would be like Harvey Keitel in Pulp Fiction, where like they have a huge problem and then they bring in the wolf to handle the problem. Or there's like the technical person who gets parachuted in, like the Tom Cruise type, who comes in on a wire and he's here to solve it all because he knows everything. You're coming in as a technical leader, more of as a coordinator, as opposed to the Keavy the genius is here and she will have the answer. Is that right?
Yes, definitely. I do like that sort of. I thrive with that sort of responsibility of like, just send me in, and my boss or whoever can just consider it handled. And I kind of get a buzz out of the unknown of that, and being able to go in and figure out like, what even are we dealing with here? What are the problems? And yeah, I don't know. I'm a pretty driven person, and I get a buzz out of the project nature of that kind of work, I think, rather
Mm-hmm.
than doing this sort of the same thing every week for every week of the year.
There's a great TV show called Scandal. You might have seen Olivia Pope in a
Oh
GIF where
yes.
she's walking in her wonderful white raincoat and she's on the phone like it's handled. So your boss calls you, says there's a huge problem over in Project A. All right, handled, and then you have to go and actually mean it, right? You can't just say it; it has to actually do the work too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think what I've been trying to communicate to other folk recently that are like, oh, how would you even approach this work is like, I've had some exciting successes at shipping projects, but what people don't see is like the mountain of preparation that goes before that.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely for me, if I'm going to put my name, put my hand up and say, I'll handle this, like I want to be as prepared as is humanly possible to make that a successful project. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Hey, friends, I want to thank one of our sponsors, the company Text Control. They're the creator of TX Text Control. It's a Microsoft Word-inspired document editor library. It's basically a document processing engine for your web applications. They've got libraries for ASP.NET MVC, for Angular, for Node.js, and they just released a .NET Core version. It lets you basically integrate a WYSIWYG document editor into your web applications. You can edit docs, you can do merge templates, you can include data, you can even create Adobe PDF documents with a fully featured API. It's really pretty amazing. You can try it free, and I encourage you to check out the live demos at textcontrol.com/demos. textcontrol.com/demos. It's really pretty amazing piece of work. Another thing that you've called out is the idea of the cultural impact you can have. And I think sometimes when someone doesn't have direct reports, when they're not a manager, when they don't feel senior, but they want to be, they feel helpless that they can't in fact change the culture of their organization. But for example, you've improved technical interview processes, and you have a passion in healthy code reviews. How can you, as a non-manager, change the way an organization does code reviews and make things better for people?
Oh, yeah. It's a great question, but to be honest, my experience has been very different to that assumption. Like, I think you have a lot more freedom to make change culturally in an organization, maybe, than as a manager. Or that's been my experience, maybe a little more free of, I don't know, the chain of command telling you, like, this is the message and this is what you have to do. And maybe it's a little easier maybe to challenge the status quo, or maybe you're not as much as a threat to people, like if you're...
Interesting. So if you're not a manager, you're less of a threat, which allows you to get more done because you're sneaking around shipping.
Yeah. Or like, if there's so many different implications. If your manager is telling people to do something, and that person might have an effect on your performance review or ultimately your salary. But if a very senior engineer is promoting or advocating a certain thing, it's just different. Those connotations out there. So I find it's been like, I don't know, I've just had more space to push back on certain things or to advocate for certain things.
One of the things you point out is that this autonomy, that ability to move around, is earned by delivering, right? And I think that's a thing that for early in career people to remember, that it's not necessarily just shipping every quarter, because not everything ships neatly on a quarter, but just someone asks you to do something, you deliver, whether it's a big task or a small task. That slowly builds up kind of your reputation in the org, your stock effectively in the org as someone who can get things done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one example that was pretty terrifying at the time, but of kind of a mixture of like being able to push back and having the trust. There was a time once when somebody really senior in the engineering org didn't like the direction of a thing and said we should just unship this, like literally
unship.
Unship, yeah, like literally send out an email to all the beta users saying like, sorry, we're like taking this back. And
oh my God.
And I thought it was a terrible idea. Like, I thought this was a really good project and that we should continue it. And I remember the product manager had drafted the email, was ready to send to all the integrators the next day to pull the plug on this thing. And I practically begged him and said, like, please don't send this email. Like, give me 48 hours and I will figure out a better way we can do this. And he agreed, I guess, because I had some credibility in the area and said like, okay, you got...
Because it was you.
Yeah, you've got 48 hours and then we're pulling the plug. And it worked. Like I came up with a different proposal and it turned out to have been the right decision. But that was kind of terrifying, but just having I don't know, I was in a good position to question, like, this is actually a really bad decision. And I know you have way more authority than me, but I think this is a bad move and please let me prove why.
That is a movie that I would want to see. It's almost like the archetype of the bad cop, not the bad cop, but like the cop that's always getting in trouble, that goes into the sergeant's office, and they're like, I'm tired of justifying your craziness to the commissioner, and you're like, I need 48 hours. So I just am imagining you like leaning forward with your fists on the desk. I need 48 hours. Just okay, you've got 36 hours, and then you go off and parachute in and keep the thing from being unshipped.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
But this is really important. You can't just go in there as someone that hasn't ever done anything successful. You have to earn that stock, that reputation, those points. And in this case, you earned them over a period of shipping, and then you spent them.
Yes,
But in
definitely.
the process of spending them, earned even more because you in fact succeeded.
Yeah, on that occasion, like I was right to question, and the outcome was better off for everybody. And I've definitely also lost those conversations. I've had similar scenarios where I've said, like, being the annoying voice, saying like, I think this is the wrong decision, and here's why, and sort of it not gone the way I wanted. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that's also a really good role that you can play as a very senior IC, is to be the extra voice, questioning things, and sort of helping the discussion when because there's always trade-offs, obviously, right? Of always some conflict of, I don't know, whether it's a short-term versus long-term conflict, or if it meets the business needs rather than the wider ecosystem, or whatever the conflict is. Like, those are good meaty conversations for a senior IC to get involved in.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that you talk about a lot on your blog is this idea of a strike team. What is a strike team, and how do you spin them up and then ramp them up and then spin them down?
Yeah. For me, what has worked is, this has come about when maybe I've been working solo on like doing some research, and that kind of like trying to figure out what we could do next, and come up with maybe a prototype or a proposal on, here's the direction this should go. This is what I did with that checks API that you mentioned, and had enough together and convinced enough people of like, yeah, this is a really good idea, we should do this. But then needed a team to make that happen. So that was one occasion where I recruited people to form that team. That would be a fairly short term thing, and eventually the project would be owned by a wider group. But that's where I've used a strike team, like maybe a project that will last, maybe we'll work on it together for 6 months or 9 months, and then it will be consumed by the wider group.
Are you borrowing them full time? How do you manage the staffing of that? How do you convince their bosses to loan them to you, or is this volunteer work that they're doing in their copious spare time?
A mixture of like getting what I have done is a mixture of getting the individual on board first, and then, or making sure that they be interested and on board, and then going to the manager and just presented a case of like why this would be really valuable for the company, for the team, and also that I really need that person specifically. And usually I've had a mixture of like either having people maybe not completely full time, maybe that's a negotiated thing of like, can I have this person for X days a week, and they can still do whatever general team responsibilities that they have. But that's worked out really well for me.
What is some advice that you would give someone, in the sense of, you've been a senior IC in various orgs, but now you actually have some positional privilege, in that you could email someone who doesn't know you in the org, and then they would go, "Oh, Office of the CTO," and now you suddenly got a label behind you to back you up. You've built the reputation up, so that's why you're there now. But how can a senior IC who doesn't necessarily have a label like that get included? Is it just through clarity of their communication style and their own reputation? Like, it's such a thing that is dependent on reputation. As you are building that up, you don't have you're not 20 years in, maybe you're 7 years into your career. How do you get included in those conversations?
Yeah, it's so hard. And to be honest, even like I've struggled with that at times, even when I, in theory had built up the credibility and, should have been included or respected or whatever. I think some of the things that can work well is either having an explicit sponsor, like someone really in a high position in the company, just to advocate for you, whether you're present or not, or having some peers that will, back you up in a group call.
That sponsorship idea, I was talking with David Fowler. David Fowler is one of the architects of .NET and ASP.NET, and by the way, he told me to tell you he's a big fan of your blog.
Oh, nice.
And he really likes the differentiation between the word mentor and sponsor. Mentors give you advice, but sponsors will sneak you into meetings basically and let you sit in the back. And then you just wait for your moment to pounce, say something smart. And then suddenly you moved from sitting on the back wall or leaning against the back wall to sitting at the table.
Right, yeah. And funny, I had a position once, like a informal position where I was really acting as the technical representative for my department. But until we put a name to that, there was always difficulty in, uh, I guess, people taking me seriously in big group calls. And so I went to like my boss at the time, who was, had more seniority, or had a good title, and said, like, could you, well, this will just make things easier for everyone, could you just tell them officially that I am acting as the technical representative? And once he did that, it made life so much easier.
Was that hard to do that? I mean, because you're basically like I'll be honest, I've done that as well. I've asked someone. Isn't it funny? We're here with two grown people saying, you could just say what you want, and maybe they'll give it to you.
Right.
But it still feels like tall grade school where it's like I really want to go on the field trip. Um, I said I'd like to be in that meeting. I think I would have a lot of value if you'd let me join you all. And they'll either say yes or no. And the problem is you have to prep for the no and be ready for the yes.
Yeah. Well, how I find it easier to, like, I don't know, deal with in my own head is that I'm not asking for a favor. Like, the company has already asked me to perform this role, and it would just make it easier if everybody else understood that context as well.
Mm.
So, yeah,
Isn't that the thing, though? It's all about context. This is why at the beginning when you said Katrina, how she said that you were the favorite person to disagree with, because it's like, well, what do you know? Well, what do you know? What do you know?
yeah.
It's not about who's the smartest. It's about who has the context that we're missing. And then if we all get the context, then we'll be able to pull this thing off. And that ultimately is what the technical IC is supposed to do, is build consensus and energy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you use this power, you've got this independence, you don't have a team as much, you're able to go and then support and influence other things. Are you kind of applying pressure on different orgs and different folks to move the strategic direction forward?
Yes, very, very much. Like, my current role is leading the strategy for the API at Fastly, and that involves like talking to a whole bunch of different teams and figuring out what they need, and how to move things forward. You mentioned a minute ago, like, having to ask explicitly, or it seems so simple to say, like, here's what I want. And I found the opposite is true, like talking to other teams, of like just asking people, like, what do you actually need? Like, what do you all want? And that's been really helpful.
And that gets to your point about you're not just an engineer talking to other engineers, right? There's technical writers, product managers, interface designers, salespeople, lawyers. You have a whole list here: execs, competitors, peers, users. It's usually who talks to all of those people, who coordinates all of those people. A senior IC, a senior independent can go and do that when maybe someone else doing it wouldn't land the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I take a very like collaborative approach to that. A mixture of just what I think works and my personality. Like, I'm not gonna kind of come in and try and boss anybody around. So I'm always trying to like, just get buy-in, get people on board, and a lot of that's through smaller conversations and building that up.
So I've realized that as someone who is complaining about acronyms, I don't remember if we ever actually told people that IC is an individual contributor, and that'll be my bad, because it's independent contributor, individual contributor, one who doesn't have a full team. Like you don't know you don't have people who work for you directly from an HR perspective. You're not signing checks. You're not promoting people.
Yes.
You're an individual or an independent contributor in a strategic technical leadership role. And like you said, it's a hard path. You kind of have to ask for it, don't you? You have to cultivate that path.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, what has worked is just realizing the parts of that work that I really enjoy and the parts that I don't like so much, and just being persistent and trying to create and do well in those opportunities that kind of allow me to keep doing that. And
well, cool. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
yeah, thank you so much for having me.
We've been talking with Keavy McMinn. You can check out her blog at keavy.com. That's Keavy. She's got lots of great information about how you can thrive as an individual contributor and build bridges as a technical leader. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.